Welcome to Politipeeps. My name is Edward Hofer, and I'm joined with two other Politipeeps.
Hi, I'm Dennis Consorti.
And I'm Siobhan Lynch. We are the Politipeeps.
Yes, welcome. And today we're having a repeat guest, Mathias Nordvig, visiting professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. If you could introduce yourself for a moment, Mathias.
I am Mathias Nordvig, a visiting assistant professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm an expert in pre-Christian Scandinavian mythology and religion, and I'm also somewhat of an expert in Arctic cultures, a subject that I teach at the university too.
Last time we spoke about the potential for libertarian or anarchic societies in medieval Iceland, and I was wondering if you could recap that conversation just really quick and share what conclusions we came to.
Sure. I think our overall conclusion is that the society in Iceland, a so-called Free State period from 870 to 1262, has some aspects that sort of go along the lines of anarchic libertarian society, but it's also a medieval society, and it's also a society based off sort of traditions emanating from the European continent. In that sense, it's not a society that has a ideology as we would perceive it today. Some of it comes down to them simply having to figure out what type of society are we starting here. And in that sense, one of the primary things that we see is that there's no king, in strong opposition to what we see elsewhere in Europe. But on the other hand, even though that this constitution that they create in 930, when they established the General Assembly, even though that it looks relatively liberal through a modern lens, it might not have been particularly liberal when it comes down to praxis. And of course, one of the biggest problems is that, well, we lack any form of sort of protection against violence, for instance, in that kind of society. We do have, of course, a legal code, but there's no way to execute the verdicts of the courts, for instance. So a historically interesting society, but nonetheless not a society that manages to really execute the notion of an anarchic libertarian society.
Yeah, so it was, in some ways, they practiced a form of anarchy and libertarianism, but it was not an explicit form that they had written down saying we are going to do things like this. So it was more of how their society was evolving than anything that was explicit. Yes,
and eventually it also shows to be very vulnerable to more hierarchical structures and basically a Norwegian takeover eventually. So yeah.
I wanted to add one thing. One of the things that we did talk about was that through a modern libertarian lens, it certainly didn't fit because there was no real non-aggression type principle. I mean, if you're going to look at anything that's a little more modern, it was kind of might makes right in many ways. So you're talking more sterner than, I don't know, Rothbard.
Yeah, and even I think you could even say that, a lot of the fabric of that society was predicated on the notion of executing violence against each other in different ways, and that's really what they're trying to mitigate by establishing the rules of that society slowly over the years.